Well, nice to see you again, Emma. How
Hello.
are you? How are
Good. How are you
you?
doing?
Good,
I'm
good,
good. Thanks for
good,
asking.
good.
Sorry for the delay there. I was screen sharing and it wasn't like sharing my screen for some reason. I know somebody in the chat had wanted the link to the quiz and the soap note. And for context tonight, it'll only be the quiz. There's no soap note given that we're going to talk about medical school secondary essays and kind of pre-writing and the steps that goes into that. So there won't be that. But if you all are interested, there is in the bottom left-hand corner a medical school secondary essays because the world is QR codes now. There's a QR code at the bottom. And we'll kind of go through, try to keep it as virtual, or I'm sorry, as interactive as possible, which sometimes can be challenging with a virtual setting, but we'll do our best. I have the chat open, I can see it. So if you guys want to throw questions in there, that's perfect. And I'll kind of ask you guys some things along the way, and we'll kind of make it as fun as we can in the next 1 hour. So here's a little bit about me. This is in the upper right hand corner. That was our residency programs book club. If you guys haven't read the book, that you can probably see a few of our residents holding up. It's Legacy by Ujay Blackstock. It is a fantastic book. I think it's a must read for everybody in medicine. I'm the type of person that I admittedly half read books and then I end up like putting them down. So my bookshelves are all like half read books. But that's a must read. It's a quick read too. And then in the bottom sort of right hand corner is my dog with sunglasses at the park in Oregon. She's a cool dog. And then otherwise, a little bit about me. I went to the University of New Mexico and got a degree in med lab sciences, and then ended up going to medical school in New Mexico, and then residency here in Portland, Oregon. And I'm interested in doing an addiction fellowship, and some of my passions are global health advocacy and medical education, hence why you guys are stuck with me today. Great. Well, let's keep going here. First things first, I like to kind of have you guys point out where you are on the map. And you guys may be pros at this by now. You can do it by going to annotate and then finding a stamp and then kind of tell me where you're at in the country. Ooh, somebody's in New Mexico. Wow. I see it's right in the middle, so I'm guessing it's Albuquerque. So you can do it by going to annotate and then stamp. Or you can like find the pen like someone else is doing. Just draw your circle. This looks great. We have some California, looks like Texas, some Northeast, love it. Some Georgia, wow. We usually don't see anybody from Georgia, I don't think. Well, great. This is great. Thanks for wherever you guys are. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you guys being here. And let's get going. Let me clear this though first, so there's not a bunch of junk on our screen while we're going. Not that your guys' beautiful artwork is junk. All right. Oops. So here we go. Here's kind of the first slide. And if you know anything about EKGs, this is not a rhythm of which is sustainable to life. I thought it was funny. But let's do our first poll here. I'm gonna launch it. Basically all this question's asking is, are you applying this cycle? It kind of gives me a little bit of insight how to tailor the session to you all. And I think regardless of whether you are applying this cycle or you're coming up applying next cycle, or kind of going forward, I think this can be a helpful session for you. So kind of take these pearls as we go, and we will kind of try to make the most out of it. Looks like most everybody is in. I'll end the poll here and share the results with you. So basically what I'm seeing is that 71% of you are not applying, and that's okay. And it looks like there's 24% of you that are applying. Great and good luck. And we'll kind of give you some tips here tonight that you can kind of carry away from as you go forward, either pre-writing your secondaries or writing your secondaries in general. Okay. Let me stop sharing that and let's keep going. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Basically, what we'll talk about is we're going to talk about primarily some secondary essay tips. So kind of broad strokes, how to approach secondary essays. And then we're going to talk about four main prompts here. These are the ones I see most often when I edit secondary essays. And these are the ones that a lot of institutions kind of have their own rendition of. So I wanted to talk about these and give you guys some exposure to these common questions and hopefully prepare you guys for those. What do? You guys participate, ask questions, throw them in there. I'm happy to respond. And then fill out this survey at the end in addition to the quiz. And I put that in the chat before. It's 10 super easy questions. They're all true false this time because they're kind of all about these secondary questions. I think they're rather intuitive. Obviously, I'm biased because I wrote them. But hopefully you guys can kind of get through it in one foul swoop because I want kind of the bulk of your time to be with me, not on that quiz. Great. Let me clear that again and let's keep going. Okay, so here's kind of my top 10 tips, my top 10 pearls for when you're walking into secondaries. And this is something that I kind of included in that blog post that I posted up previously. But the first one is brainstorm. Very rarely, even for me, I like writing. I like narrative medicine. It's one of my passions in general. And I always said that if I didn't do medicine, I would be a journalist. But even for somebody like me, I have to brainstorm. You have to kind of have this outline. You have to know and gather your thoughts about what you're going to talk about. So you can brainstorm, with some of the coaches at Motivate MD, or kind of bounce ideas off of your friends, family, etc., or just by yourself and kind of create an outline of what you want to talk about based on what the prompt is asking you. So that's my first tip. My second one is answer the prompt. And it sounds so silly. You're probably like, duh. That's, what you have to do is answer the prompt. But you would be incredibly surprised. I get some essays where there's lots of words, there's lots of sentences, there's lots of characters. And you tell me this beautiful narrative, this beautiful anecdote, but don't relate that back to what the question is asking. And so my biggest piece of advice is to answer the prompt. Tell me those anecdotes and show and don't tell, and give examples that support what you're trying to say, but be sure you relate that back to what the prompt is asking. For instance, if you are going to answer the diversity prompt, and you kind of lay out this anecdote of how you were volunteering in the past, and you were exposed to a lot of diversity when you did a medical mission. Great. Relate that back to specifically what the question's asking in terms of diversity. Okay. My third tip is don't just copy and paste. It's going to seem tempting, especially when you're kind of inundated with a zillion secondaries and you're going to be like, yeah, I answered this one before. And you're going to try to take it and copy it into your essay. I think that it's okay to use the foundation or kind of the scaffolding of your writing and tailor it to what the question's asking, but you want to show that you've put in time and dedication and effort into these essays. And so I want you to avoid kind of that temptation of copy and paste and then kind of sending the essay in general, because you taking the time to tailor your work to what the schools are asking is going to pay off. All right, number 4, paint a picture of who you are. That's the biggest justice you can do yourself in these secondary essays. As you can imagine, through your application, all they really see about you is your primary and your secondary application. And all they see is things that you've written. And so it's important, and this kind of will lead into another point that I have in kind of these top 10 points. But it's going to be important for you to paint a picture of who you are and show who you are as a result of your experiences, to show that you are a good candidate for medical school and to be accepted. And my next one is be specific, be intentional about what you're writing and what you're saying, and make the characters count. Sometimes these essays are as few characters as 500 characters, down to like 200 characters. So sometimes they're pretty short essays, and you have to be very meticulous about what you're writing and what you're including. But be sure that you are being specific and again answering the prompt. You're being very intentional about what you're choosing to write, and that at the end of the day is showing something about you. And then here's another one, and you guys probably have felt this being in college when they're like, here's an optional session, and you're like, oh god, this is not optional. Or like if you ever played sports, I always felt the pressure when they're like, yeah, open field, and it's like, yeah, that's not optional, that's mandatory. And that's how I feel about these secondary essays that are optional, unless you truly like don't have something to say. Like it's like, do you have any academic remediations or something? Like you don't have to like say something just for the sake of saying it, but like if they're like, an optional question is name your interest in the Northeast or a geographic region, I would answer that. I think it's a good opportunity for you to show something else about you. 7, be genuine. I think a lot of times students will come to me and they'll say, I don't know what they're looking for in this essay. And the answer is nothing. They're not looking for something specific. They're looking to know more about you. As you can imagine, if they were looking for something, they would get the same type of medical student over and over and over. So really what we want to do is be genuine and show the most about you as an individual. And then I talked about this a little bit, but when I talked about the answering the prompt, but use anecdotes or examples where applicable. If you say that, I'm very meticulous in my work and I'm very compassionate, then great, show me examples of an experience that show you with those qualities, because showing goes a long way versus telling, and really kind of gives that evidence that we're looking for and paints that picture very clearly of who you are as number 9, time is of the essence. And this is not to like kind of put pressure on you, but as you can imagine, as they send out secondary essays and get them back, they're potentially sending out interview invites. And so you don't want to sit on these essays for a while. Oftentimes there is not kind of a deadline associated with them, but turning them around in 2 weeks at the latest is great. If you can do it a little bit sooner, great. Sometimes you need a little bit of time to kind of work with an editor to get it back and forth, to kind of get your essay to the point that you want it to be and kind of have other eyes on it. I know that that's the case for me too. I have to have somebody else look over my writing because I'll read something over and over and over and I'm like, wow, this looks beautiful. It's ready to go. And it's not ready to go, and I missed all these things, and someone else kind of comes through with a fine-tooth comb and kind of cleans up the things that you overlooked. And that kind of leads me into my 10th point, which is using proper grammar, punctuation, and spelling. And a lot of AI within, Google Docs. Word kind of has these features built in. But, having someone else look over it is important too. And will allow you to kind of not stand out in the wrong way, which is like for, bad grammar, punctuation, spelling. And my 11th is have a trusted editor. This could be, a service that you use, somebody like me, or, a colleague that you trust, a friend, etc. Somebody just to look over it, to make sure you have eyes on your essay, to make sure you're answering the prompts, to make sure that you're showing the most about you, as well as looking at those grammar, punctuation, and spelling things. So here's the first thing that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the prompt of why our school. And if you look here on the screen, there's several different examples of how people or how schools ask this question. So for instance, Miami Miller asks, why have you selected the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine for your medical education? Please be as specific as possible. All the way down to as simple as, why have you chosen to apply to CNUCOM? And then this is kind of a how you contribute to the diversity. This is kind of like a diversity and a like YS question kind of all bundled into one. And we're going to talk about a diversity question down the line. And then, here's Georgetown just asking, why have you chosen to apply to Georgetown? And how do you think that your education at Georgetown will prepare you to become a physician for the future? Meaning, why are you a good fit for our school? So as you can see, there's a bunch of different ways to ask the same question. And that's, besides why do you want to be a doctor, like why do you want to go to our school is also incredibly important. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about how to address this question. So I like to keep it simple here and kind of talk about do's and don'ts. So don'ts being, these are the pitfalls to avoid. The first one is being generic. I see often that people are like, I want to go to your school to address or underserved communities. And great if they have that, and that's something that they're known for, but be specific. What about their underserved community or the communities that they kind of are associated with are interesting to you? Do they have, a free clinic? Do they have are they associated with a safety net hospital? Like what specifics are you really looking at? Do they do more rural health? Do they have, a houseless population that you're interested in interested in helping? And then the other thing, which kind of is on the do side, is tie it to experiences that you're interested in. For instance, if you did a medical mission in Guatemala and you're interested in global health, or you're interested in border health, then say, I'm interested in this at your school, and then kind of talk about that experience, or alternatively kind of lay out that experience and say, for that reason, I think your school would be an unparalleled fit to continue evolving my passion for global health. So as you can see, you're kind of saying, this is why I'm interested in your school, while also kind of tying that to your experiences and demonstrating that you're a good fit, which is, also that second bullet point there. The other thing, and we talked about this before, and I'm talking about it again because I'm serious about it, is don't recycle from other essays or from other schools, because it's going to look a little suspicious when you talk about something that their school may not have or doesn't fit that closely. Or you say, I'm interested in problem-based learning, and they don't have a problem-based learning curriculum or something like that. That comes off to them as if you're not interested in their school, when I know that you guys are, or you've applied to their school, and you don't want this to kind of fall through the cracks. And then my last tip on the do side is be specific beyond the surface level. So instead of just kind of going on their website and saying, okay, I'm interested in their curriculum in terms of this, kind of doing a deeper dive and trying to figure out what the school offers, whether that's going to Q&A sessions, talking to students that are there, doing kind of a deeper dive on their social media accounts to find out what they're interested in, etc. That can be good ways to learn more about the school and find out how you would be a good fit, and then also marry that to your interests and what you've done thus far. Okay, so here's a big example. I don't expect you guys to read this, especially at the end of the day. I'm going to point out some things that I think are important in this, and you guys will have access to these slides, so you can go back and read these examples and sort of see what the parts are that are kind of standing out to you or that you can kind of emulate. So the first thing that I want to show you is this kind of narrative lead. And we talk a lot about this in all writing, and by we, I mean me, but in the personal statement, but it's good to have it in any essay, especially when it's a little lengthier like this one. So this individual says, when I signed up for the trip, I never imagined that I would hold a human heart in my hands. And I'm interested. I want to read more about that and what this experience actually entailed. So that's what the first part is that I want to kind of draw your attention into is kind of this idea is capturing the reader's attention. And what's the goal of that is to getting them to read on. Because as you can imagine, they're getting a lot of secondary essays across their desk. And you want to make sure that they continue reading yours, which increases your chances of getting an interview invite. Okay. Next thing is showing the relevance and significance. So, they've talked about all of these things here, but why is that important? And how does that relate to what the question is asking, which is why our school? So they make this connection here to say, to learn from some of the best hospitals serving the northern, central, and southern New Jersey, and from one of the most diverse populations in the nation. So they've shown that they have had kind of these experiences with diverse populations, and that's something that's interesting to them, and then kind of tie that into the relevance and significance and why they're talking about those experiences. Now, finally, the next is they also kind of talk about the curriculum and how that is something that they're interested in as well. So they mentioned specifically not like a broad strokes curriculum, but they're interested in the human dimensions course. But they tied that before to in high school, this individual developed an interest in preventative health and some of the more mindful aspects such as nutrition, posture, sleep hygiene, and physical activity. And so kind of tied that into what the school offers, which is kind of this human dimension course. So those are a few things that I wanted to kind of draw your attention to. I think they're important to kind of talk about and point out in an essay that's asking why the school. So as you can see, this individual included several things that show that they're interested in the school and correspondingly shows a deeply rooted interest in the school, which is exactly what we want to do. Now, the next prompt is discuss a time you overcame a challenge. Like the why us prompt, there is tons of different ways that the schools can ask this question. And speaking of questions, if you guys have questions for me, feel free to throw them in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions that come up. Now, this question kind of manifests in a lot of ways. Sometimes they'll ask about like academic challenges. Sometimes they'll talk about personal challenge. Sometimes they'll talk about your biggest challenge in pursuing medicine. There's this one asks for a personal challenge. This one's personal or professional challenge. And this one just asking about a time they had a setback. And then often what they will ask is like what you learned as a result, or how you responded to the challenge, what you learned. And that's what I think is most telling, and it's going to give the reader most insight into who you are. And I know I can feel the trepidation through the screen. You guys are like, oh God, I don't want to talk about my failures. I don't want to talk about my weaknesses. I don't want to talk about my mistakes. Because what if they think it's a red flag? I know you guys are all thinking that. And I really don't love the word like red flag in general when I'm doing advising for pre-meds and even for residency. I think there's very few things that are like truly a red flag. Like things that I think are like could be a red flag if ever there was one, is things like you know, if you have like a criminal record or something, things like that are concerning. Um, but a lot of times, these things that you have to talk about, these challenges that you face, personal, academic, professional, are telling in terms of how you deal with adversity and how your experiences have made you who you are. So don't feel trepidation to kind of talk about those things. And we'll talk about how you can do that. So here's that kind of algorithm again, the kind of do's and don'ts. Don't complain. That's like a tough one. And that kind of goes along with the second one, which is like make excuses. You know, if you like got a C in your organic chemistry class, you don't want to be like, you know, Professor so and so like was horrible at teaching all these things, which I know you guys wouldn't do, but sometimes you got to just say it to get it out there. And then the last don't is don't fail to reflect on the importance of the challenge. What did this teach you? What skills did you get from the experience? And how might this be important going forward? And we're going to talk a little bit about this and kind of the do's. Okay. So one of the do's is do be introspective. You know, kind of you're going to reflect about things in your application. And those of you that are kind of in the process of doing this, you're probably already blue in the face from reflecting about all of these things that you thought were not that important. And now you're kind of reflecting on how they're important and how they made you who you are and how they've informed your interest in medicine, and how they'll make you a good medical student and doctor one day. So that's what's important, and that is what shows you how, or shows the reader and the admissions committee how your experiences have made you who you are. Okay. We talked a little bit about this previously, but do show and not tell. So this is that example of saying, I'm a hard worker versus showing me that experience, giving me that example that shows you are in fact a hard worker. So giving that relevance, that kind of painting a picture of that experience. And then of course, include the relevance and significance and why that's important, how it's going to be important going forward, or skills that you've gotten in the process. Okay. All right. So here's an example of an adversity essay. This question specifically asks, describe a significant challenge you experienced in your life and share strategies for how you overcame the challenge. So as you can tell, this one is like kind of broad. It can be personal, professional, academic, etc. But the things that I want to highlight to you is name the problem or name what the challenge is. I have read a lot of essays in the last couple of years where the kind of challenge is not exactly clear to me. I can probably guess what the challenge is, but I think with these secondary essays and where you have such limited time in general, it's important to kind of just tell them what you want them to know. So tell them what the problem is, tell them what you learned, and tell them why it's important. So lay all those things out. So that's number one. The second thing is, how is the problem rectified? Or like, how did you overcome this challenge? Or how did you find a resolution to this problem? And then finally, which we talked a little bit about, is including the relevance and significance. So this individual at the kind of end of their challenge essay says that this experience taught the individual that they have aptitude, strength, and drive to succeed in medical school and overcome any obstacle that they might face. And then they also kind of reflect on how this might be important for the future, is like they're eager to embrace more personal growth and realize their full potential. So that's kind of not only saying like what they learned from the experience, how they got resources, implemented advice, but these skills that they acquired as well, this aptitude, strength, and drive, as well as how this might be important going forward in the future, which is that they are kind of, have a growth mindset, essentially. In shorter words, that's exactly what this individual is kind of telling the reader. Okay, good. Any questions out there? Feel free to throw them in the chat. I know you guys are kind of sitting there and absorbing it all. It's a lot of information. All right. So the next one I have kind of a checklist for, which is this diversity question. And I know some people, what I often get when I sit down to brainstorm with students about kind of the diversity essays, are like, well, I'm not really that diverse. I don't know what to write. And I will tell you that diversity, it kind of transcends this kind of status quo, like box definition of diversity. It doesn't just mean like race, gender, ethnicity, like we often think about, or like classically, historically have thought about. It's other things too. So diversity of thoughts, diversity of experiences, and diversity of identity too. I've seen, several people write beautiful essays about gender, about race, about sexual orientation, and how that sort of made them who they are today. And so it kind of transcends that. And I saw a couple of questions. The first one is, I'm assuming these essays are always written in first person. Yeah, that's a great question, Colleen. Often they are. And I think maybe a handful of times I've seen them not. But yeah, they're like, I did this, I had this experience, etc. So yeah, good question. What if you don't have enough experience to expand upon the question? Good question. And sometimes it's going to feel like that. And that might be where it's helpful to kind of brainstorm a little bit and see. But often what you'll kind of do is answer the question up front, kind of show that that experience, that example that kind of supports what you're saying or supports your thesis. And then you're going to reflect on it quite a bit. And I think really what you'll find is that like you'll probably have not enough space. I think that's really kind of the bucket that most people fall into. And then another question, how do you not sound like you're bragging in the essay? Yeah, good question. And I think, it's a certain balance that you have to find in terms of your writing. And I think a lot of our editors are helpful at doing that. I think a good way to think about it is like always by saying like I was humbled to do this, or I was privileged to have this experience, or I learned this. Yeah, exactly. There's always a way to introduce humility. And I think a good way to do it is just kind of reflecting and being like honest and genuine about your experiences and how they have how they've sort of made you who you are. And if you're talking from a genuine kind of perspective like that, it's hard to it's hard to come off as like cocky through your essay. Like things you want to avoid is being like, this experience has made me the best medical school applicant ever. That would, I think, be the antithesis of humility. And I don't think any of you guys would do that by any means. But I do think there is a balance that you kind of have to strike. And I'm not sure I exactly answered your question, Anna or Anna. I hope I didn't butcher your name. But that's, one way of doing it. So here's my checklist for diversity, the diversity essay. We kind of talked about this one, which is like showing diversity in terms of what that may mean to you. Some people who are non-traditional applicants, I think this question sets them up really well to kind of present themselves. So like if you got an English degree, great. That's diversity. If you spent, half of your life living in another country, great, that's diversity. If you are the child of immigrant parents, great, that's diversity. And so some of these things might come obvious to you. Some things may not. Maybe you have a hobby that has kind of instilled in you a little bit of sort of diversity and kind of differentiates you from, the status quo medical school applicant. The next point is provide an anecdote that kind of supports that. We've been, talking through this a little bit and talking about how to include these anecdotes to show more about you. The next thing would be make a connection to medicine and how it will make you a good doctor. So, if your experience or what you're going to talk about is that you're a scuba diver, and this has taught you a lot of discipline, and you think that will permeate your future medical education by having the discipline to achieve challenging things and overcome adversity. Great. That's a perfect sort of transition to how that's important to medicine. And what that's doing, as we kind of talked about in a few other prompts, is it's giving that relevance and significance. Why should the reader care about what you're talking about? And I often talk about this when I talk communication too, when we talk about how to approach medical school and residency interviews is, why is this important, and why should the person across from you think this is important too? And it's really kind of selling that point and selling yourself there. Another thing that you can do is make a connection to the institution if possible. For instance, if you spent, 6 months in Guatemala, I don't know why I keep saying Guatemala, El Salvador, I'll change it up, another Latin American country. If you spent 6 months in El Salvador doing medical missions, and the school that you're going to offers a global health initiative or a global health track, great. This might be the perfect spot to kind of plug it in here to also show why the school. So it's kind of doubling as both. I mean, you don't want to spend all of your characters talking about why the school, because at the end of the day, my one of my points, as you guys remember, is be sure to answer the prompt. But you may kind of throw that in there too to kind of show that you're interested in their institution. Now, the final thing is, did I answer the question? And as you guys are coming to learn, I'm obsessed with you guys making sure that you answer the question. It happens not infrequently that I see that, where you've written all these great things, but I want to know how that will contribute to the diversity of the institution. So be sure, no matter what you've written, you kind of make that connection back to the prompt, even if it's a final sentence, to kind of, package things away and say, this is the answer to the question in short. Okay. Let's keep going. If you guys have any more questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat, and we'll kind of go through again a few of those examples here. Okay. So here is example prompts. So there's several different examples. In this first one at Tufts, they ask about, do you consider yourself a person who would contribute to the diversity? If yes, explain why. So this is one of those questions where it's not optional, so you shouldn't say no. I'm gonna put no. Don't say that. I'll do a little arrow with the cross out. Don't say no to a question like this. This is where you kind of brainstorm, your experiences and what delineates you from other people. Whether that's your experiences, your diversity of thought. Maybe you got a philosophy degree or anthropology, or a non-traditional degree or something. This would be a great place to talk about how you would contribute to the diversity of their school. Down here, they kind of talk about at the Mayo Clinic, they talk about we're all differentiated or connected to one another by individual inflections that constitute our diversity. Explain how your own relationship with diversity and to the diversity, diversities of others manifest in your personal and professional activities. So this is asking, like, what are the diverse things that you have or will do in the future. And then, if we jump down to here to Virginia, this just straight up says how you contribute to the diversity of your medical school class. And other schools have that same sort of rendition. Some kind of give you some clues, like Tulane. They say ethnicity, race, sexuality, religion, disability, economic background. And those are just a few, as they kind of say. It includes, but not limited to. So this is kind of where you guys might start thinking about these prompts, because these ones are the diversity questions can be challenging. I remember being in your shoes and being like, I don't feel diverse. But for me personally, I talked a lot about how my background in med lab sciences allows me a unique perspective to see medicine and to see patient care. And so that was kind of like my diversity approach. Among that, I had lived in different areas of the country and, have been able to kind of adapt and grow alongside, people from different backgrounds. So great. All right, let me clear this and then we'll keep going. If you guys have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. And I'll show you kind of an example here. And then I think we have one more after this, and then we'll kind of wrap up. So here's a few things to kind of talk about in terms of importance here. The first one is that anecdote that we're talking about, where we say, give an anecdote that shows instead of tells. So this individual kind of talks about their Peace Corps training, which I know you guys are like, oh my God, do I have to join the Peace Corps? And the answer is no, you don't have to. This is a pretty it's a strong experience. If you guys have done the Peace Corps, great. If you want to do the Peace Corps, you certainly can, but it's not a requirement for medical school, so don't panic. So they give this anecdote about their experience in the Peace Corps. They talk about which elements kind of make them diverse or going to contribute to the diversity of the school. So they talk about being the oldest child and part of a mixed race family. And then having had to translate. They also talk about these other things about they specifically say this ability to stand in two places with while facilitating this dialogue. So that's kind of also how they anticipate that they will be able to contribute to the school. And then another part that we kind of talked about is like, how are they going to contribute to the school with this experience? So in this instance, they kind of make this connection to, they kind of put this like blank. This is kind of our example of the school. But this school is a place for visionary thinking and a community of innovators. They strive to be part of a curiosity-driven, translating differences and supporting evidence-based solutions to health problems. So they kind of use their experience in the Peace Corps as kind of leverage to show that here. And as you can see, that can be difficult. And so the way I want you guys to think about it is like, what is the anecdote? What is the experience? And how are you going to contribute to the school with that? Okay. Okay. I see a question that popped up. I know we shouldn't tell but show, but is it possible to tell before showing? Yeah, totally. Great question. So you can say something like, say your experience is, what do we want to say? What is a quality that you all have that you think contributes to your diversity, if you don't mind sharing? And I will make an example here. Bilingual, great. I love that. I used to be, and then I forgot all the Spanish I learned because I moved from New Mexico. So bilingual, great, bilingual. So you can say like your opening sentence. We're creating your essay right now. As a result of my experience with proficiency in multiple languages, I believe I know it's kind of going into the other text, which is annoying. There. I believe I will be able to connect to individuals struggling with overcoming language barriers. So something like that says a couple things to me. So it says number one, what the quality is. So it's proficiency with multiple languages. And then like how is this important? How would this be able to connect or contribute to the diversity? This is kind of aimed more towards patient care, as you can see. Is being able to connect to individuals struggling with overcoming barriers. And so this might be where you kind of go into an anecdote that kind of shows you doing that. Maybe you had an experience where you connected with somebody of whom was struggling to communicate, and you know, you helped minimize those language barriers or something like that. Okay. Great. And then somebody else put being a third culture child living in a different country than your country of origin. Great. Yeah, that's perfect. And I'm glad you kind of were able to think of that. I think that that's a tremendous experience. And then, yeah, if you were going to make that connection to living in a different country than your country of origin, you might say, being from X, I'm not sure where you're from. I have had the unique experience of navigating new cultural norms while forming connections with others from diverse backgrounds. So that's an example of like maybe your opening sentence. And I realized I got this as a direct message. And the individual had said, living in a country different than your country of origin. So this is kind of what I brainstormed for that. And being able to kind of draw that connection, you might use an anecdote that kind of helps paint that picture. Okay. Any questions about that, guys? I hope that makes a little more sense in terms of how you can make that connection. I think the diversity prompt can be very challenging, but it does have the propensity for you to really kind of knock that out of the park and show a lot about yourself. Okay, we'll keep going here. Now, finally, this one might be my favorite. I think it's my favorite in general because it's kind of a catch-22 in terms of you know what you can talk about. You can talk about really anything, truly. And so what I think is important to do is kind of inventory the things that you have discussed in your essays, either in the secondary in general, but also in your personal statement. So you may realize that like in your personal statement or in your secondaries, you didn't talk much about like your hobby of you know, underwater basket weaving. And I totally made that up. I don't know if that's one of your hobbies. You guys need to direct message me. I want to know more about it. But if that's something that made you who you are and you built a strong network and you learned a lot about yourself, great, talk about it here. Other things that people sometimes try to prioritize talking about, things like shortcomings, mistakes people made, setbacks, or weaknesses in their application, whether that's the MCAT or certain grades or things in their application that they want to be sure to kind of set the scene about. And then, as I kind of talked about, if there's hobbies or things that are important to you, great, talk about them. Maybe you're a marathon runner and you didn't have a sufficient place, elsewhere in your application to talk about, the training and how that has sort of kept you regimented in your life or something like that. This might be the place to where you really have the opportunity to show more and paint even more of a picture about yourself aside from these things that are directly related to medicine. Okay. Okay. And so for the do's and don'ts for, is there anything else you'd like us to know? Don't be repetitive. So if you've talked about something else elsewhere, either in your primary or your secondary application, or you talked about it in a most meaningful experience, you might forego that experience and talk about it elsewhere. If if you do you have an experience, I recommend not leaving it blank. So this might be where you kind of think about, the various experiences that you have and what's important to you and what makes you who you are. So this may even be like talking about an international trip that you took and how that was really formative to who you are. I would answer something here because it's another extra, 1,000, 2,000, whatever the character word length is, amount of characters to show more about you as a person. So it can give them another opportunity to have more insight into who you are. Okay. Now, in terms of do's, take inventory of what you've written. We talked a little bit about that before and saying, okay, I talked about all these things in my personal statement, which you guys are probably pretty familiar with, but kind of looking back at your secondary and seeing what other experiences you may have talked about. And then do include experiences of which you haven't had the chance to reflect on, or maybe you haven't experienced or talked about them as much. One thing to consider is, for AMCAS, when you have 3 most meaningful experiences where you get to talk about them in an additional 1,325 characters, in addition to the basic description, the 700 characters, is if there's another experience that, maybe in your application, it was between, that one and a different one, and you maybe have a 4th most meaningful experience, this might be the chance to talk about it more in depth. And then, as always, it's important to kind of talk about the relevance and the significance or the importance of how this might be, sort of foundational or a good experience for you going forward as you approach your medical education. Great. I see a question in the chat. It says, I had an experience where I got to be a mock patient for a physician, but you couldn't add it to your work and activity section because you couldn't get permission to add their email. Yeah, I think you could definitely talk about that. I think that gives you kind of more exposure into this like illness script and like what patients do and say, and get you like more exposure to medicine. So I would talk about it. I think that that's a cool experience too. And then what does a typical format look like for these essays? Do you need to have a strict intro and conclusion kind of thing, or does it depend? Yeah, good question, Colleen. I think it certainly depends on the amount of characters. As you can imagine, if you have a longer amount, it's going to start to feel kind of more personal statement-y. But often what I recommend is having kind of that introduction, that lead right away that either hooks the reader in and or answers the question right up front. And that can kind of feel, and often when I read these essays, I often recommend people put this like pseudo thesis where they kind of answer the question or kind of give an answer to the question right up front. So if the answer to the question is, why our school, you might kind of have a hook where you're kind of hooking them in, and then you might say, I want to go to school X for reasons X, Y, and Z. And then in your sort of body paragraphs of sort, you talk about reasons X, Y, and Z and tie them to your experiences. So in short, you do want to kind of have a strong structure. It doesn't have to be kind of this like 5 paragraph structure, because sometimes you don't have the luxury of that amount of length, but you do want to stay organized in your thoughts, basically. I hope that answers your question, Colleen. And that's all I got. So 3 minutes to spare. I will stick around if you guys have any additional questions. Here is the QR code for the quiz. And it's a pretty simple quiz again, I think, where you guys will be able to go through and kind of I think answer those questions pretty simply, and not spend too much of your evening on them. But I appreciate you guys all coming and listening. Let me know if you have any questions kind of going forward, and I'll see you the next time I am back on for virtual rounds. Otherwise, have a good night.